Hi, this is Matt with Driftwood Tide Music. I'm here to show you today the mixing processing on the lead guitar part for my recent cover of Reconsider Baby. So let's dive in. If you haven't seen my previous videos, and especially the blog tutorial on the recording setup for the guitar, I urge you to check that out. I'm also not going to go through in any detail the mix preparations, so you can look at some of the older videos to see that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through each of these tracks with and without the processing and explain why we mixed it the way we did and how we got that sound. So there's no huge secrets here. This is pretty basic engineering, but I do have a lot of tracks for a single lead guitar part, especially considering I'm going for a classic sound. I explain this a little bit more in the recording blog. But let's start with listening to the first mic, which is on a line 6 amp. And then we'll compare that with the matchless amp, which is a little dirtier sound. We've also got 3 room mics. I'll start with the center one, which is a ribbon mic, which is about 3 feet back. And then we'll let you hear the 2 additional room mics together at the same time. So that's the combination of sounds that we have, and let me show you what we did with them. I've often said that a well-recorded electric guitar part requires little to no processing in the mix, and you'll see that for the most part that holds true on this song as well. The first thing I wanted to do is I want the sound is being driven by the matchless. The line 6 is a complement. So we've got these two together. And the line 6 just adds a little something extra to the matchless. It's not really like 2 wildly different sounds that are panned out. It's really meant to be one sound. With that said, I do have the line 6 panned slightly off center from the matchless, and the reason why is it just makes it slightly more noticeable. So I don't want it to be completely hidden, otherwise there's no point in doing that track. But putting it slightly off center, it allows a little bit more of the character to come through. But let's dive into the matchless track. That's the first track that has a little processing on it. We're using the Waves CLA 76, the blue stripe version of the 1176. The reason I chose this is really for the character. It's got a nice character to it, and I just really wanted to tame a few transients. The matchless is a pretty bright amp. It's got a lot of transients are coming through, and I just wanted to tame that a little bit. So we'll run a little clip. That's without. And that's with. You can see I've got the volume matched up pretty well, so you're not hearing the obvious differences there. But you can see it's a fairly moderate amount of compression. It's actually more than I often use on guitars. I usually compress dirty guitars very little, and clean guitars I'll compress more. And this is kind of in between. It's a gritty sound, but not really overly distorted. I've got a fairly slow attack as far as 1176 standards go, and a release that's pretty comparable. We're compressing, limiting at a 4:1 ratio. The reason I chose the blue stripe version over the blackface version is I just felt like it had a little bit better character for this track. I find that the blue stripe, it might have a little bit more magic or mojo, if you will, in the mids than the 1176 black version. So that's why I chose that. The only other track that has any individual processing is the ribbon mic. It's a very dark mic. The processing on it is pretty subtle. It's really just what I wanted to do is roll off a little of the darkness at the bottom and give it just a little bit of boost on in the upper mids and a little bite. So let's listen to that. So you can hear it's fairly subtle, but what it does is it actually makes the sound slightly thinner, but it keeps out a little bit of the rumble at the bottom and adds a little bite to it. All the other processing on the guitar is done on buses. And what I did is I created subgroups, and I have a subgroup for the direct mics, and a subgroup for the room mics, and a subgroup for all of the guitars together. This, again, may seem a little overzealous, but for the type of processing I wanted to do, I hope you'll see why. Let's start with the direct mics. On the direct mics, the first processor I have is the Slate Digital, their version of a Fairchild or a Manley Varimio. You'll see that it has a fairly limited amount of compression going on. I'm actually hitting it at a reasonably strong level, but I've got the mix dialed back, so only 40% of the wet process signal is being mixed back in. What this does is, to me, it's just gluing the two amp sounds together a little bit more. It's not doing a ton of controlling of the dynamics. We're taking maybe 3 dB of gain reduction off the top at the most, but it's kind of blending them together and making them into a sound that's a single source. And I also feel that the Varimio type compressors, they have, again, it's a mojo. There's color here that I'm after that I like. So we'll hear that. So we'll come into this next section. I'll let you hear it with and without. This is without. This is with. Now there's a couple things that I hear in there. I hear a little bit more reverb coming through off of the matchless amp, which I like. And again, the sound is just lightly more controlled. It's pretty subtle. The next thing I have on this is an API EQ. Again, we're doing very little here. I'm adding a tiny bit of extra bite, 2 dB at 1.5, and I'm rolling off just a little bit of the very low end. So we'll let you hear how this sounds. So again, you can hear it actually thins the sound out a little bit. So slightly brighter, just it comes through as a little bit thinner. Let's move on now to the room mics. I have all 3 room mics bused to the same group. Again, similar approach. I'm doing a little EQ and compression. The compression on this is going to be a little stronger because what I'm trying to do with the room mics is I am trying to accentuate the room. I'm trying to make the room feel bigger. I'm trying to tie this in with the drums and the bass and the piano. And I'm also trying to accentuate even more the sound of the 2 amps blended together as opposed to the 2 amps separately. And again, the reverb on the matchless is fantastic, and I want to bring that out a little bit more as well. So here's what we're doing here. This is without. Here's with. Okay, so again, it might be hard to hear, but what we're doing is a 3-to-1 ratio. We've got the analog noise all the way up, and as we're compressing this, we're getting 6 to maybe as much as 9 at the very, very, very most dB of gain reduction. And what we're doing is we're getting a little bit more of the room sound, a little bit more of the reverb of the amp, and you'll hear when this was recorded, we were playing back the rest of the band over the speakers, and it feels like that is brought out just a little bit more as well. The EQ here really is doing almost nothing. We have it rolling off the low end, and that's it. You'll notice I have it rolling off the ultra high end as well. But it really is doing nothing. The Neve style amp, EQ, adds a slight amount of color, and I like the way it filters the low end. It's my go-to for filtering the low end. So let's hear these together without the processing on the master. And let's compare that to the individual sounds. Here's the room mics only. Here's the direct mics only. The direct mics are very in your face. They're bright, they're edgy. The room mics are warm and spacey. And it's the combination of the two that really make the sound happen. So let's look at what we're doing on all of the guitar tracks. The first up is this Slate digital version of the Focusrite Red. We're using this, again, very subtly. So again, we're getting about a decibel of gain reduction throughout most of the song is all. We are, again, not even running that at a full wet mix. We're blending the wet signal and the dry signal together, which makes this even more transparent. So if you don't hear the difference, don't worry. Over the expensive studio monitors, you can definitely hear this imparts a little bit more control. The drive feature adds a small bit of magic mojo, if you would. And the only other thing going on here is, again, this is just really doing nothing. I've got it set at 50. This is quite low. This is just in case there's any stray frequencies that have gotten through that haven't already been squared away. And again, that also imparts a little bit of color. The last thing I'm doing with this is you'll notice over here, I am using this as an output controller. When I'm drawing in my automation, once I get in a lot of the automation, if I decide that a track is a little too loud or a little too quiet overall, sometimes rather than redrawing automation, I'll just come up here and pull down the output a dB or two or whatever it needs to be. So that's it for that. As far as effects and other processing, I do have the room mics set up to send a little bit of bleed back over into the rhythm section bus, which I talked about earlier, which really helps tie everything together. And as you could hear when we were listening to the room mics here, you can also hear the rest of the band in those mics. Couple of other things, and then we'll be done. Most of the reverb is coming from the amp itself. I do make it a habit to send a little bit of lead guitar usually to the same reverb the vocal is going to. So what I've done is I've put a little bit of reverb from the direct mics to the same reverb the vocals are going through, and the room mics are going to the same reverb that all of the other instruments are going to, and that helps tie it together, while using the vocal reverb helps it have some consistency with the vocal part because they're really interplaying throughout the song. And then it also helps it stand out slightly from the rest of the instruments. So I will uncheck those, and you can hear how those effects work. Also, I have a delay, and the delay is set up rather than doing a single delay throughout the whole song. What I've got is a delay for the main song and then a delay for the solo, and the delay for the solo is a little bit bigger. I'll show those to you real quick and then let you hear them. So the main delay is set up with Wave Super Tap, as is the delay for the solo. In a lot of cases, I would just automate the changes in the plugin and just use one plugin, but for whatever reason, I just decided I wanted to just use two separate plugins. You'll notice The echoes themselves are about 10 dB louder on the solo, and also you'll notice that we have a little bit wider image with the echoes. So let me let you hear that. We're going to play a section right before the solo. While it's playing, you'll see this unmute and this one mute, and you'll see the switch, and then you can hear the difference. So you can hear a very obvious increase in the volume of the echoes. So that's it. I'll leave you with a little snippet of the finished track, and I will see you next for the vocals.
You'll come back home someday.